The truth revealed about Tony Modra is darker than the highlights ever showed. He was the flying superstar who kicked goals nobody else could reach, the face that built a football club from scratch. But behind the magic was a mess of pressure, poor choices, and brutal timing that stole 2 premierships right out of his hands. This is the real story of Modra mania, where fame came so fast it burned, and the biggest controversies were not just gossip, they changed everything. We are going back through the chaos, the breaking points, and the moments that turned a once-in-a-generation talent into a cautionary tale about what happens when the spotlight gets too bright, too soon. Picture this. A kid from the Riverland who could leap like gravity did not apply, landing in Adelaide just as a new club needed a hero. Tony Modra gave them one. In 1993, he exploded onto the scene with 129 goals across the season, including finals, and suddenly South Australia had a sporting icon bigger than anyone they had seen in years. They called it Modra mania, and it was real. Every mark was a poster, every game was an event, and every move he made off the field became front-page news. The hype was not manufactured, it was organic, raw, and overwhelming. Fans packed stadiums just to see him fly. Kids wore his number, and grown adults queued for hours to get his autograph. He was not just a footballer, he became a cultural phenomenon in a state desperate for something to celebrate. The way Modra played was different from anyone else at the time. While power forwards like Jason Dunstall and Tony Lockett used strength and positioning to dominate, Modra relied on gravity-defying verticality and agility. He would launch himself into the air with a timing and athleticism that made it look effortless, taking marks that seemed impossible. His aerial ability was not just effective, it was theatrical, and that made him perfect for a league that was starting to understand the value of spectacle. Adelaide needed someone who could sell tickets and build a brand, and Modra delivered that in ways the club could never have predicted. But here is the thing nobody wanted to admit back then. The same fame that made him untouchable also made him a target, and not just from defenders. The scrutiny was relentless, the expectations were crushing, and the speed at which it all happened left no room for adjustment. Modra went from kicking goals in front of a few hundred people in country towns to performing in front of 50,000 screaming fans and millions watching on television. And that shift happened in the span of months, not years. There was no gradual build, no time to learn how to handle the media, the public attention, or the constant demands on his time. He was thrown into the deep end, and while his talent kept him afloat on the field, everything else started to drown him. If you want more footy stories where we cut through the myths and show what really happened, use the hype feature and give this video some hype. It helps a ton. Now let us get into the timeline because this story has layers, and every layer makes the ending hurt more. Modra was never meant for city life. Before the AFL even knew his name, he was dominating country football in the Riverland, kicking 76 goals for Loxton in 1989, and then 118 for Renmark Rovers in 1990, leading them to a premiership. That is not just good, that is unreal. But when he tried to make the jump to the big league in 1988, playing for West Adelaide under 19s, he could not handle it. The urban environment, the rigid structures, the whole city football culture felt wrong, so he quit and went home. That early retreat should have been a warning sign. He was brilliant but fragile when it came to the stuff outside the game. The pressure of expectations, the loneliness of being away from everything familiar, it all became too much, and he chose to walk away rather than push through it. The Riverland was where Modra felt comfortable, where life made sense, where he could be himself without the weight of other people's dreams pressing down on him. Out there, football was still a game, still something he loved, not something he owed to thousands of strangers. That contrast between who he was in the country and who he was expected to be in the city became the defining tension of his career, and it never fully resolved. Then the admin drama started. In 1991, Modra tried to move to Red Cliffs in the Sunraysia Football League, and West Adelaide dragged him to a tribunal hearing in Adelaide. Why? Because they knew if he got drafted to an AFL club, they would only get a transfer fee if he was still contracted to them. The tribunal ruled he was still their player, which locked him into the South Australian system. That ruling led to the Adelaide Crows picking him up as a zone concession when the club formed. So even before his first AFL game, there were legal fights and contract battles. The talent was obvious, but so was the friction. Modra was not just fighting defenders, he was fighting administrators, lawyers, and a system that wanted to control his future before he even had a chance to prove himself at the top level. His debut season in 1992 was solid. 21 goals from 8 games, but but nothing that screamed superstar yet. Then 1993 hit, and everything changed. The club had pinned their hopes on Scott Hodges, a prolific goal kicker who had smashed 153 goals for Port Adelaide in 1990. Hodges was supposed to be the main man at full forward. But round one against Richmond at the MCG, Hodges got injured and the door opened for Modra. What happened next was pure chaos. He kicked 10 goals in that game and the hype ignited like a bushfire. Suddenly Adelaide had a superstar and the public could not get enough. By the end of 1993, Modra had kicked 119 goals in the home and away season, finishing runner-up to Gary Ablett, senior in the Coleman Medal. Including finals, that number jumped to 129, the 11th highest season tally in VFL-AFL history. He hit 100 goals in just his 22nd game, faster than almost anyone in history. Only John Coleman and Peter Hudson got there quicker. He was named All-Australian and became the first Crow to kick 100 goals in a season. His mark of the year against North Melbourne became the defining image of Modra mania, and the club's fan base exploded. The Adelaide Football Club was still finding its identity, still trying to convince South Australia that it deserved their loyalty over the traditional SANFL clubs, and Modra gave them a reason to believe. He built the fan base almost single-handedly, turning skeptics into believers with every spectacular mark and every impossible goal. But here is the edge. The fame came so fast there was no ramp-up, no adjustment period. One day he was a country footballer, the next he was the biggest name in South Australian sport, and that velocity was dangerous. The club celebrated the success, the media fed the frenzy, and nobody stopped to ask if Modra was okay, if he could handle what was happening, or if anyone was helping him navigate the madness. The cracks started showing before the 1994 season even began. On the eve of round one, Modra was in crisis. Former coach Graham Corns later described the emergency meetings that had to happen just to keep him in the game. The catalyst was a midweek lunch that spiraled out of control. Modra did not have a manager at the time, so he went to lunch with Bruce Lindner on a Wednesday to discuss representation. That lunch turned into a prolonged drinking session, and he missed training that night. When he did not contact the club the next day, General Manager Bill Sanders and Cornies went to his house. They found him watching television, refusing to answer the door. When they finally got through to him, Modra said the words that almost ended it all. "I am completely over it. I am quitting. I do not want to play this game anymore." That was not a negotiation tactic. That was burnout. The intervention by club officials focused on getting him physically and mentally stable, not on guilt or pressure. That was the only reason he suited up for round one. And then, despite all the chaos, despite being on the edge of walking away, Modra went out and kicked 13 goals against Carlton, guarded by Stephen Silvagni, widely considered the best defender of the era. That performance should have been celebrated as heroic, but the truth is it just papered over the real problem. He was not coping, and nobody knew how to help him long term. The club got the result they needed, the fans got the spectacle they wanted, and Modra got pushed further into a corner he could not escape. Later that year, the internal pressure turned into a very public mess. During a flight from Hong Kong, Modra insulted a female flight attendant. The incident was bad enough that both the Adelaide Crows and the AFL fined him. It was the first major stain on his public image, and it forced a conversation the league was not ready for. How do you manage the behaviour of newly professional athletes who are earning big money and facing massive scrutiny? Modra issued a public apology, and in it he blamed the pressures of his nightlife and the sudden elevation to fame. He talked about the social isolation that came with being so famous in a city like Adelaide, where every move was watched, every night out became a story. Some reports at the time suggested Modra was considering a move to Brisbane just to escape the exposure. He felt like he was being treated like a pop star instead of a footballer, and the attention was suffocating. Club officials were frustrated because they could see his talent being wasted on a lifestyle they thought was harmful. But Modra saw it differently. For him, the nightlife was not the problem. It was the escape from the problem. Either way, the damage was done. The image of the clean-cut superstar was cracking, and the narrative started to shift. People began asking if he was disciplined enough, professional enough, mature enough to handle what he had been given. The questions were fair, but they also missed the point. Modra was not failing because he lacked discipline. He was struggling because nobody had prepared him for what fame at that level actually meant. Then came 1997, and this is where the story turns from messy to tragic. Modra was at the absolute peak of his powers. He won the Coleman Medal with 84 goals and earned his second All-Australian selection. He was the best forward in the competition, no question. Adelaide was charging toward a premiership, and Modra was the spearhead. But in the preliminary final against the Western Bulldogs, during the first quarter, he landed awkwardly in a marking contest and felt a big snap in his knee. The anterior cruciate ligament tore completely. Here is the cruel detail. Back in 1995, during a game against Geelong, Modra had already torn 3/4 of that same ACL. The medical staff at the time told him the remaining quarter was enough to keep playing on, and it was for 2 years. He played elite football, won a Coleman medal, and dominated games on a knee that was already compromised. But that decision, medically sound or not, set up a catastrophic failure waiting to happen. When the ligament finally snapped in 1997, it was not just bad luck, it was the inevitable result of playing on borrowed time. The emotional toll was brutal. Modra travelled with the team to the grand final and participated in the parade, but he could not play. He stood on the sidelines and watched his teammates win Adelaide's first ever premiership. Footage from that day shows him leaning against the MCG fence late in the game, wiping away tears. That image became one of the defining moments of the 1997 grand final, not for celebration, but for heartbreak. He was the best forward in the league, the face of the club, and he had to watch it all happen without him. The premiership parade, the celebrations, the glory, all of it happened around him while he stood there as a spectator in his own story. The injury required a grueling 10-month recovery, and when Modra returned in the second half of the 1998 season, he was not the same player. He appeared in 8 games and kicked 19 goals, but the explosive athleticism was gone. His form was inconsistent, and it was clear he was still finding his way back. Then came the qualifying final, and Modra had a poor performance. Coach Malcolm Blight, known for his demanding and sometimes harsh management style, made a call that ended Modra's time at Adelaide. Blight omitted him from the side for the rest of the final series and told him to go back to West Adelaide to find form. That was it. No second chance, no olive branch, just done. The relationship between Modra and Blight had been strained for a while, but this was the final break. Reports suggest the communication gap between them had grown so wide that neither side knew how to fix it. Years later, Blight admitted he should have handled it differently, that he should have offered some kind of reconciliation to repair the relationship. But at the time, the decision stood, and Modra watched Adelaide win their second consecutive premiership from the outside again. 2 flags, 2 years, and the best forward of the era was not part of either. The trade to Fremantle for the 1999 season caused outrage among Adelaide fans. The Crows got draft picks, including selection 29, which became Tyson Stenglein, and selection 34, which became Brian Bianca. But for the supporters, losing Modra felt like losing the club's identity. He was the reason so many people fell in love with Adelaide football in the first place, and now he was gone. Imagine having to leave your home state just to feel free again. That is what it came to for Modra. At Fremantle, he found a second chance. In 1999, he kicked 71 goals, a club record that stood until Matthew Pavlich broke it in 2007. He also helped Fremantle secure their first ever Western Derby victory in 2000. The talent was still there, the magic still worked, but the damage from Adelaide, the injuries, the fallout, all of it followed him. By mid-2001, chronic knee issues forced him to retire at just 32 years old. His career total was 588 goals from 165 games, an average of 3.56 goals per match. Only the absolute legends of the game have numbers like that. But the numbers do not tell the whole story. For nearly a decade after he retired, there was a rift between Modra and the Adelaide Football Club. Part of it was the Blight fallout. Part of it was that he fell 3 years short of the 10-year qualification for life membership, and the club did not seem interested in fixing it. The silence between them was loud, painful, and unnecessary. Then in 2008, Adelaide awarded him life membership anyway, and that decision marked the beginning of reconciliation. Today, his status as a Crows legend is undisputed, but it took years to get there, years of distance and hurt that should never have happened. So here is the gut punch, the climax of this whole mess. Tony Modra was the best forward in the competition in 1997, won the Coleman Medal, and still missed the premiership because of an injury built on a decision made 2 years earlier. Then, after fighting back from that, after putting his body through hell to return, he missed the second premiership because his coach could not find a way to work with him. 2 flags, 2 chances, both stolen by circumstances that felt avoidable or at least manageable, if things had been handled differently. The talent was never the question. Modra could do things on a footy field that made people stop and stare. But the fame, the pressure, the poor choices, the injuries, the fallout, all of it added up to a career that should have had more silverware, more celebration, more joy. The legacy is complicated. Modra helped build Adelaide into the financial powerhouse it is today. He was a trailblazer for economic opportunities in the game and helped establish pathways for diverse fan engagement, even becoming an early icon within the LGBTQ community. His three Mark of the Year awards in 1993, 1997, and 2000 show his longevity and aerial consistency despite the injuries. The transition from Godra in the 1990s to Hall of Fame ambassador today is a full circle story, but it is also a reminder of what gets lost along the way when fame hits too hard and too fast. Modra's story is not just about what he achieved, it is about what he could have achieved if the system had been better equipped to protect him. If the club had recognised the warning signs earlier, if the pressures had been managed instead of ignored. If you made it this far, hit the like button, subscribe if you have not already, and drop a comment telling us what you think the biggest turning point was for Modra. Was it the 1994 breakdown, the flight incident, the 1997 injury, or the fallout with Blight? We want to hear your take, because this story does not have one easy answer. It has a dozen moments where things could have gone differently, and that is what makes it so frustrating and so fascinating at the same time.